The Y Factor is proudly brought to you by Flames Steakhouse Pizza and Ribs in Campsie, the best steak you'll ever have.
The Y Factor.
Hey Jamil, where can you get the best steak and ribs?
At Flames.
Have they got any deals on?
Yeah, mate. Specials on Thursdays, pizza and pastas, only $10.
$10?
Yeah, $10. $10. And 20% off everything else.
Only on Thursdays and Sundays.
Where at?
At Flames.
396 Beamish Street, Campsie.
Be there.
Assalamu alaikum, peace be upon you all.
Sunrise warms the horizon, sand dunes form in the distance. He's up and out in an instant. The crowd, they all were waiting, watching and anticipating. A man appears from afar. Could it be the one sent by Allah? He shouts, here comes the prophet. His face is a light that drives out the darkness. Words are alive, his message is living. Joy everywhere, our voices are singing. طلع البدر علينا من ثنيات الوداع وجب الشكر علينا لا دعا لله داع.
Cute kittens have been flooding the Y Factor page. Furry felines and their antics are all the rage. Everybody seems to have a cat story to tell. But before getting carried away, think about this as well. Cats may be cute, but they need lots of attention. They need toys, food, vaccines, and affection. So if you're the type who loves their bed, maybe get a pot plant instead.
Zainab, it looks like we're going to keep you on as a guest host if every week we're going to get one of your witty poems, are we here?
Oh, if you're lucky, you just might test him.
All right, welcome to another episode of the Y Factor, listeners. Today is Thursday, the 26th of April. 26th of April, we've come so far.
Subhanallah,
Yeah.
time just flies.
Indeed. All right. So, inshallah, this episode we interview two young, aspiring, what do you call them?
Corporate
ladder,
professionals.
Yeah, corporate ladder climbers, corporate professionals, about what it means to be a Muslim, a young Muslim professional in the corporate world, you know, the conflicts of interest there, how it works, how they get around, and they've got very interesting things to say. We also interview brother Mehmet Ozalp about his book launch, Islam Between Tradition and Modernity, an Australian Perspective, which will take place this Saturday, and he's got some interesting things to shed in relation to the book launch and in relation to this topic. What else has been happening, Zainab, on the Y Factor page?
Just the usual, as I said in my witty poem, as you so dubbed it. The usual cat photos, the usual food stories, and, you know, all the hard-hitting stories that we love at the Y Factor.
That's right. So keep those posts coming. We love them on the Y Factor. And for those who aren't members, make sure you do join our Y Factor page, which is Y Factor 87.6 FM on Facebook. And inshallah, join the Y Factor community, as we like to call it, which is increasing.
We love all of our fans. We love each and every one of you. In a halal way, of course.
Of course, Zainab. All right, so let's just get started on the news for this week.
This is great news for interfaith dialogue. It was found in America that Jewish Americans hold more favourable views of Mormons and Muslims than those belonging to the Christian right. This is according to a recent published survey on Jewish values. And so they conducted a survey and they asked 1,000 Jewish Americans to rate how favourably they view Mormons, Muslims and members of the so-called Christian right on a scale of 1 to 100. Now, of the three groups, Mormons received the highest favourability rating of 47%. And then Muslims, we didn't do too badly for ourselves, came in at number 2 at 41.4%. Whereas the Christian right received a much lower favourability rating of 20.9%. And so they were thinking about why this could be, and perhaps it's because of their political alignments, though the political alignments of conservative Christians. So it's interesting to think about that in terms of traditional Jewish-Muslim relations.
Especially recently in relation to the presidential, campaigns and elections going through. In America, you've got a lot of nutters now, especially, the extreme right wing, No, honestly, it's just comical, the campaigns. Who was it, the one that ate the foot-long sausage?
Oh, I know. Yeah, I remember who you're talking about. But the interesting thing is I remember reading an article about the place of religion in politics, and they were saying that Julia Gillard, for example, has openly admitted that she's an atheist, but if an American candidate for presidency admitted that he was an atheist, well, he wouldn't be a candidate any longer, let's just say that. It's a big detractor if you are non-religious.
Especially in the Bible Belt region in America. I mean, it's interesting, even, with voters, we like to think like we're conscious voters, we vote based on research and, what we think of various politicians and things. But sometimes, what you end up voting for, who you end up voting for or why you vote it's just interesting. For example, like in the last election, right, I did my research on all the parties and I decided, I'm making an informed decision about who I'm voting for and did a lot of research, right? So I went into the polling booth and I was just ready to fill it out according to all the research I did. And then on the paper, like something just shines at me and it was the No Packing Meters Party, right? And I previously hadn't heard of them, and I was so excited, Zainab. So all my months of toil and hard work went down the gutter, and I just voted for the No Packing Meters Party.
Yeah, and I believe my dad voted for the fishing party. For all you fishermen out there, they're the ones to vote for.
But, it's interesting because even not just in relation to voting and stuff, but, research has shown that, for example, things like buying cars or houses and things like that, people go into it with a lot of research, but the make it or break it at the end of the day are very trivial things. So when I was reading the study about cars, for example, people look at the engine, the capacity of the car, all these things, but at the end of the day, like something trivial like colour or, what the actual salesman or woman that's selling the car to them, what they say can make or break. So I don't know, I think this is interesting sociological research.
Yeah, well, if you're very interested in the issues we were bringing up before about Jewish-Muslim relations, you're going to find this story really interesting as well. And this is actually a remarkable story in which a Muslim woman, Layla Jabarin, she lives in northern Israel, well, what's called Israel. She lives in northern Israel and she is actually a Jewish Holocaust survivor who was born in Auschwitz concentration camp. And although her family knew that she was a Jewish convert, they didn't know that she was actually a survivor of the Holocaust. And it's only in the past week that Layla Jabarin, whose birth name was Helen Brushatsky, actually revealed to her family her horrible, traumatic past. And that's amazing because if you see a photo, you can just imagine this for all our listeners. She looks like any other old Arab.
Looks like your grandma.
She looks like your grandma, in her scarf and her robe. And you just think, wow, she was Helen Brushatsky, who was born in Auschwitz concentration camp. And
for the last 52 years.
She's kept this a secret and it's only come out now. And one of her children, he was saying that every year she would cry on Holocaust Memorial Day and they'd know, oh, Mum's going to cry today, we better give her some space. But they never really understood why.
And her mother was from Hungary and her father was of Russian descent and they were actually living in Yugoslavia at the time with their two young sons. So it's just very, very, very interesting, this whole, like that take on the Arab-Israeli conflict and the survivors and, Because usually I think, especially with the Palestinian activists, they like to use the term, for example, the Holocaust of the Palestinian people or the genocide of the Palestinian people. And a lot of Jews do get offended at the use of such words because for them it's such a memorable occasion. So it's actually interesting when someone combines both, as a Muslim who usually, in that part of the land you'll probably be having your alliances more with Palestine and having those Israeli allegiances and Jewish roots that go back to definitely interesting stuff. Well, speaking of memorials and, remembering the fallen and the dead, it was Anzac Day yesterday. And I think it was interesting because, as the nation, came to a halt, there were memorial services. We had our public holiday, so we got paid for staying at home. It was was lots of fun. A lot of people had a lot of reflections to share on Anzac Day, and it was interesting because just going through Facebook, the feed, some people had statuses about it's interesting that we keep regurgitating this line, lest we forget, but are we living this dream of lest we forget, and at the same time our soldiers at the moment are in Iraq, they are in Afghanistan, they're undergoing these battles and things like that. So what are we forgetting? Are we really forgetting if their lives were so dear to us, would we be sending them to Afghanistan, to Iraq to fight a war that Australia really has no part in? We're not defending our country. So I don't know. It's interesting. What do you have to say?
Well, the phrase "lest we forget," I mean, that in itself is it's an interesting phrase, because I think a lot of people over the years have come to just accept this phrase without actually thinking, what does it mean? What are we remembering? And what is it that we shouldn't forget? Because people are commemorating the sacrifice that these soldiers made, and that was the ultimate sacrifice of their lives. But then, okay, where do we go with that? The conclusion is that sacrificing lives is a horrible, horrible thing. And so, therefore, if you apply it in our contemporary context, we think, well, all these lives are being sacrificed in wars which really we have no part in. So I don't know if people are really taking the true meaning of lest we forget.
Even generally, ever since the Iraq War started, look at post 9/11, the terminology being used, previously the soldiers were just called soldiers, but now they're being referred to as diggers, right? So when you've got the word diggers is very, very laden. There's many, many connotations attached, and it comes from a paradigm itself, So when you take out that word and use it in the context of Afghanistan, of Iraq, right, you're bringing back the memories of the Anzacs, of Gallipoli, of, our proud soldiers, our heroes, right? So automatically what that puts you in a position, for example, where you can't criticise, right, the actions of the soldiers in Iraq and Afghanistan, because you're seen as hostile towards this legacy of being ungrateful, that if it wasn't for the lives they sacrificed, we wouldn't have the freedoms we hold today and things like that. So it places you in a very precarious situation, and I think that's even now. So when people were like, look, we respect Anzac Day, we respect the fallen, it's not about, stepping on their memory, but it's about realising, as you said previously, what is human life? What does it mean to lose human life? And what are we doing sending our, sons and daughters of the nation to far-off countries when Australia has no direct interests?
And every year there's this debate about, because as we know, Australia is a very increasingly so multicultural country. And so what does Anzac Day actually mean to the migrants of Australia? What does it mean in terms of, okay, there was this war that was fought against. For example, Turkish Australians, what sort of a meaning are they supposed to derive from Anzac Day? Can people from different backgrounds really equally partake in this day? Or what does it actually mean in this contemporary context? And it's interesting because, as Tesnim said, looking through Facebooks, every year there's the same debates, about people who put up a status which other people find disrespectful or offensive to the memories of the diggers. And you see, when it comes from a person who's of Anglo-Saxon, white, Australian background, they can't revert to the same line, go back to where you came from, you don't understand what this means to being Aussie. But then it's interesting to see them on the back foot when it comes from one of their own, so to speak. What defence do they have there?
One of the people on my Facebook page, she posted something about, and she's from an Anglo background herself, about, questioning this Anzac spirit and things like that. And a lot of people were mentioning, the fact that Anzac Day, just like any other day where we're supposed to be, commemorating and, having deep sentiments, has become commercialised. So it's about getting, tattoos, it's about getting drunk, it's about, Fear of a Brown Planet, the comedian Nazim Hussain. He was actually on Twitter, he wrote, "Oh my God, Anzac biscuits were on special. How derogatory to the memory of the fallen," right? So it's actually, so it's interesting to see the commercialisation, or the not even commercialisation. How do you say it? Like when it becomes so.
Like, do you mean commodification?
Commodification, and it just becomes like a, like I wake up, it's Anzac Day, my great ancestors died in this war, let's just go, to the service, pretend I care, and then...
Because I think about it sometimes, like, for example, how long ago was what the occasion that we're commemorating, it was almost 100 years ago now. And so you think about the evolution of this holiday. Is it always going to mean the same thing? All the diggers have died. What about when their children die, when their children's children die? How removed will we become from this day, or will it always serve as a marker of national identity?
I think the most interesting thing was, and I'll find this article to post on the Y Factor, was the fact that the budget allocated to Anzac Day, so Anzac Day celebrations, just the pomp and the hype, is actually a lot less dedicated to what they spend on mental and rehabilitation programs to the IDF. And you think, what has it really become? Like these soldiers, especially with Afghanistan and Iraq and the veterans of the Vietnam War, of the Second World War, the First World War, and all these things, right? They have post-traumatic stress disorder and all these lingering mental health conditions, right? But what are we doing for them really? And it's interesting that the pomp and the hype around Anzac Day, the budget is going to that rather than rehabilitation programs for these soldiers.
Well, because it's funny that you mentioned that, actually, because I was listening to a radio program yesterday just by coincidence, and they were talking about this issue of post-traumatic stress disorder in soldiers, and the statistics, it just really shocked me. Apparently, in the USA, one war veteran attempts suicide every 80 minutes. Which is just shocking to me. And they were saying that there have been cases where soldiers have been diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder and they are still sent back to the current war fronts. And they were saying that it's kind of unprecedented in the current society, because there are a number of battlefronts they could be sent to. They could be sent to Iraq, they could be sent to Afghanistan. There are different places they could be sent to, and it just compounds all these issues.
I mean, sorry, we're like jumping from topic to topic, but just speaking about that, what was his name? The guy that killed the he went on the killing rampage. I forget his name. He was some major. Anyway, what they were saying, it was so he was actually injured in Iraq, and then he was sent again on another mission. And that was kind of the breaking point for him, because it was, as you said, they don't even have time to recover. Now, I'm not justifying his actions, and what he did was totally horrendous and horrible, but just interesting in that context, the fact that he was injured, he did not want to go back, he was forced to go back. And then again, when it came time for him to go back to his family, again, he was not given the chance, he was deployed, and that just made him, lose the plot and go on a killing rampage and things like that. Well, I don't know. It's very interesting. Y Factor listeners, let us know your thoughts on the Facebook page, inshallah, about this topic. And what did Anzac mean to you, especially as young, Australian Muslims? And some of us do come from migrant backgrounds and things like that. What does the spirit of Anzac mean to you? And just to wrap up our news segment for this week, cigarette packets could actually reach up to $80 per packet in New Zealand. Now, this is a part of an effort in New Zealand to make it a smoke-free nation by the year 2025. And officials at the Ministry of Health have commissioned an economics forecasting firm to model a variety of pricing scenarios showing how increasing the cost of cigarettes could affect smoking prevalence. So this is really, really interesting. And they're saying that the pricing plan that would increase the cost of cigarettes to 100 New Zealand dollars, which is about the equivalent of $80 per pack by 2020, with price tags increasing exponentially after that. Health officials said that even if the nation were to increase the price of cigarettes to around 40 New Zealand dollars, which is around $32, by the year 2025, it will fail to achieve the desired smoking prevalence.
Well, the whole debate around smoking I find really interesting, not because the issue of cigarette smoking being harmful is contentious, because we all know that smoking is terrible for your health. But I find it interesting that, say, maybe 40, 50 years ago, smoking was just considered a social norm, and now smokers are kind of ostracized in effect. Like if you walk past like, for example, if you walk down a street where there's a pub, they keep, like, pens for smokers. It looks like a little cage where they put the smokers in. And smokers are being banned from all these places. They want to get rid of smoking in public places. And you just think, well, smoking is terrible, but there are many other vices in society. Why are they not treated in the same way? Why are they not stigmatized in the same way?
But it depends what vices you're talking about. I mean, if you look at the statistics on how many people die as a result of smoking-related illnesses, how many cancers there are, I mean, the only other thing that I can think of is probably alcohol, which has, higher, like very, very high rates and things like that. I mean, what drug? I mean, marijuana is not legal in Australia. most of the other drugs are not legal. What is something that you can actually purchase that can affect your health? And I'm not talking about like Maccas and stuff like that.
Oh no, well I was going to bring that up because, for example, the strain on the health system that's being put with people who are obese, people who have massive, I mean, it's not just obesity on its own, that causes massive complications for your health.
Yeah, but how can you monitor, like with food, like for example with smoking, right, you increase the cost of smoking because it's so detrimental that people might cut back on smoking. But with food and obesity and things like that, you can have awareness campaigns, but you can't like make food more expensive because people need to tell you.
As in you can make certain types of food more expensive. Actually, I read an article where they said, was it in Sweden? I think it might have been in Sweden, where they actually, people have dubbed it the fat tax, but they have sort of increased the price on certain items, like certain items of food. Like obviously they wouldn't be like your staple items like bread and that sort of thing. But some items, like for example, a block of chocolate, nobody can claim that's like an essential food item. So you know what? It is actually possible to tax food.
But I don't know if that's like, for example, I understand if they decided to like tax fried chicken or something. But again, that's relative. Like, you can, like, I don't think you can, like, food is not something you should tax because it's in your, see, with smoking, it's like even small quantities are bad, right? With food, that's not the case, right? It's like with alcohol. I agree, for example, what they're saying, if they increase tax on alcohol or things that, whether in small quantities or big quantities, are effectively bad for your health. But with things that are good for your health in small quantities and in moderation. However, if you abuse them, they become bad. I don't think you can draw the line.
But then sometimes, and I think this is a principle of Islam, like for example with alcohol, like there are claims that small amounts of alcohol do have health benefits, and like for example, if people have one drink, they're not drunk and they're not necessarily going to go out and do something stupid after one drink. But it's all about prevention rather than cure, and people could say that that's the same principle with unhealthy foods.
Well, I don't know if I agree with you on Zainab, getting our Macca's prices increased and, fried chicken prices increased. So, Y Factor listeners, let us know your thoughts on this topic. I mean, it's really, really interesting. And it comes back to the whole, debate and saga about, how much should a government interfere, with our civil liberties, with things like this, whether it be smoking, whether it be alcohol, whether it be food. Is the role of the government to be this paternal figure that polices us and tells us what to do with our lives and tries to monitor us, or is it an individual decision? So if I choose to be fat, overweight, and dying of throat cancer, and an alcoholic and a gambler, isn't that my issue? Why should the government tell me what to do?
It's not as simple as that. Like for example, alcohol. If you get drunk and you're alone in your house and you're locked in your room, okay, maybe that affects nobody. But then that's just a fictitious situation. Nobody actually does that. Why do road accidents happen? Why do people get run over? For example, it's not just people behind the wheel who are drinking, it's pedestrians. A large proportion of pedestrians who actually get hit by cars are intoxicated. So it's about the impacts on society. You can say, oh, sure, let people do whatever they want. But then when it impacts on society, like for example, people eating like Big Macs all the time, they put a big strain on the health system. Like it costs the health system a lot of money to deal with these obese people. So
no, I definitely agree with you, but I'm saying just drawing the line between, as you said, like realizing the real consequences of such issues, such as budgets, health system, just the lives of the nation versus letting us have our breathing space. I don't know. I think it's a very interesting topic, very interesting discussion. So we'll leave it there, guys. Let us know your thoughts on Facebook. We're going to take a very, very short break. Stay tuned. We'll be back with Aninta and Sabeeh, and we'll be discussing the issue of Muslims in the corporate world. You're listening to The Y Factor on 87.6 FM.
The Y Factor. Let's spark a change that's within all of us. Oh, we need to smile at each other, reach for your brother, help one another. All we need is love. Oh, we need to honor our mother, shelter our sister,
weeds. I am in the trees, from the brown branches to the green leaves.
An increasing number of young Muslims are entering into the corporate world. And so to discuss this important contemporary issue, we have here with us today Sister Aninta Finconia and Brother Sabeeh Hussain to talk about their experiences in the corporate world. Welcome.
Assalamu alaikum.
Okay, just to start off, guys, we'll start with you, Sister Aninta. Just talk about what you studied, where you studied, and where you currently work.
I studied Bachelor of Accounting at UTS, and that's a scholarship course, so it sort of put me into the workforce straight away, because throughout my course I had to do internship. So at the end of that, I ended up taking a job at Brookfield Multiplex, which is an asset management / property company, and yeah, I'm working as an accountant.
Okay, and Brother Sabeeh?
I did what most of the people in my school did. Went to commerce at UNSW, did accounting finance majors. I've been in the workforce since I left high school, which is about 3-4 years ago now. So I've been in the corporate world for a fair bit, and it's been an interesting time to be in the corporate world as a Muslim. So, yeah.
You were just discussing off air that you don't agree with Sister Zainab's contention that there are many more Muslims entering the corporate world.
There are Muslims. There always have been Muslims. It's just a question of whether or not they've had the confidence to tell people that they are Muslims. So there have always been Muslims in the corporate world, because there are many intelligent Muslims in our society. Just a question of whether or not they have had the support to ask for the things that Muslims should ask. For example, special leave arrangements during Ramadan, time to pray, and things like this.
Well, the perception of the corporate world is that it's a very cutthroat type of place, and that also the other element is that it involves a lot of socialising, a lot of Friday night drinks, a lot of taking clients out to those sort of environments. Do you think that perception is accurate?
To some extent, yes, but I think you can sort of avoid it as well, because it depends on where you find work and what type of work you choose to do. Because when I was at Ernst & Young, that was certainly true. Every Friday there's a drink. Even if it's not Friday, there's always a drink up after work, and always taking clients out, and it's very competitive. You feel that everyone's trying to cut each other out just to get on top. But that's why I decided not to go there for a full-time career and choose a different sort of environment. My company is like a Canadian company, so there's no such thing as like Friday night drinks or anything like that.
Well, that's interesting that you mentioned that about Ernst & Young, because
I found that EY to be in a nutshell, EY they're actually better than most, in my opinion. And from what I've heard from friends who work at other businesses, they are more cutthroat. But it's a sad fact of the day that in the corporate world, it's almost always who you know. And if you can make those connections, those relationships, those networks, then you'll find people, and I have found this, that people shoot up the corporate ladder a lot quicker than other people who don't make the same networks, but irrespective of how good they are. So the two ways of really accelerating up the corporate ladder is number one, being really, really good at your job, which is something that not everyone is going to be. I mean, if everyone was really, really good at their job, then no one would be really, really good at their job. Either that or networking.
But the question is it possible to network without having to go to these, pub crawls and, afternoon drinks and things like that?
Very difficult. It's very difficult to do so. I think I managed to develop a balance in which I found some comfort, and I don't think a lot of Muslims did find that comfort. I think there needs to be a distinction needs to be made between corporate culture, which is the culture which the firm tries to put forth, and the culture of its employees. And there's actually quite a huge chasm of difference between the two. The corporate culture, they generally try and be understanding and accommodating. In particular, I found at Ernst & Young to be really, really good in this regard. During Ramadan, they let me change my work hours so I could go home at 3:30 to do iftar with my family, which I thought was pretty special, and they never made an issue when I went to pray Dhuhr and Asr and that kind of thing. But the culture in the employees, it's just this Western culture.
Yeah,
so it's the same old story, really. I don't know if you've had similar issues when you were working in corporate, but when work social events is almost synonymous with drinking.
No, I mean, I work for government and it's the same thing. So when Friday night comes, it's just assumed. But the difference with government is that it's not, like, you don't need connections. So if you know, so not going to work doesn't mean, you know, like, losing out on those connections, not going to drinks and things like that. You don't feel that.
Yeah, so Aninta, do you feel like being a practicing Muslim in some instances could actually jeopardize your career in the corporate world?
Not exactly. I think if you're really firm with what you believe in and that, you know, you tell them straight out, this is what you need and this is what it means. Like, I work here, but I also need to do this and this and this as a Muslim. If you're clear with that and you're firm with it in the first place, then, you know, there's no problem. There's no problem in doing what you do.
So you think it's an issue of boundary setting?
I'm not so sure about that, because I think that if you make it clear that you're a Muslim and that you don't drink, that it's true that they will not pressure you and they will be very, very respectful and in some cases curious. So it's usually a good opportunity to do dawah, but they will never be so respectful as to say, be completely objective when it comes to things like pay rises, promotions. They'll still got to look to their friends first, and if you haven't been hanging out with them, and hanging out is bars on Friday nights, then it's likely you're gonna get overlooked, and I've seen this happen.
So you think that deciding to remove yourself from those environments actually could potentially jeopardize your chances of getting ahead?
Yeah, I mean, when I was working, so basically Muslims have pretty much three options with the corporate world: is either go along to the social events, leave early, don't drink, or completely veto them altogether, or just go and get drunk. I've tried all three, it doesn't work. Kidding, by the way, I don't drink. I had a brother who I worked with, and he pretty much vetoed all events, and he got to the point where people didn't even bother inviting him out because they knew he was just going to say no. And because he made it clear that he was a Muslim and that he wasn't keen on hanging out with them, whereas I made some effort to go out and not drink, which is an issue in and of itself. But even doing what I did, I still found some discomfort, because how comfortable can you really be in a bar? I mean,
well, speaking of comfort and other issues, Aninta, you've got the scarf on, and that in itself is just like, even if you did whatever they had to do, as a symbol, just the wardrobe fix.
Yeah.
Just how does that work with the scarf and work and?
Yeah, like, do you feel like potential clients maybe perceive you in a different way, like a double take, like, oh, this is the person, the accountant, like?
No, to be honest, I haven't had any issues with that. I think with big companies, they're pretty good, they're pretty good with it, and everyone's pretty accepting, because there's so many cultures in there as well. And
I found that too. Yeah, one of the people
do
who
you wear a scarf?
Yeah, I've tried many things. Okay, let's not go into that right now. One of the sisters at work, she wore a scarf every day. Never had any issues at all.
In terms of talking about the scarf, do you think that the obstacles could be different for men and women, like Muslim men and women in the workforce, or do you think it's quite similar? Like, for example, guys need to go to Jummah prayer on Friday, and that's an issue specific to Muslim men.
Yeah, some are similar, but I think when you're talking about promotion and pay rise, I don't think that is so much as an issue for me, because at the end of the day, my priority is still, my duty as a wife, as a daughter. So if I don't get that promotion, if I don't get that pay rise, it's not a pressure for me to excel, because that's your job. That's a man's job. Exactly.
I don't understand what you're saying, because more money
exactly. So I don't understand what he's saying, and he doesn't understand what I'm saying.
So it's interesting. So do you think Islamic gender roles actually come into play in the workforce? So the corporate world is perceived as being really competitive, and so do you think maybe Muslim women don't really buy into that as much because of their gender roles?
Yeah, definitely. Most women in the workplace, they would just end up working their way up and then decide to get married when they're 30, 20 years. Yeah, and for me, that's not the case. I want to get married first, get that over and done with, and then go with my career. And that's what I'm doing. If I don't get that pay rise and
laughing.
I'm not laughing, I'm agreeing.
Don't lie.
Do you feel for Muslim men in the corporate world it's different? So is it for them, they save up and then they get married once you've got your 10 properties? Is that how it works?
It varies a lot. It varies from guy to guy, and it will vary from person to person depending on how they are. The brother that I work with, he got married when he was 21 or 22. I found other people getting married at 23 to 24, 25. I don't think that's such a huge factor for men.
Yeah, it's to their own.
So how about like in terms of ethics? Because as we were saying, the perception.
Has no place in the corporate world.
The perception is exactly as you say, that ethics has no place in the corporate world. And obviously, as Muslims, we hold ourselves up to the highest ethical standards. So do you think there have been any instances, say personal or things that you've observed, where ethics have come into play?
I'm joking. Ethics has a huge place in the corporate world, and corporate social was very important.
Is that like a disclaimer that workmates will say?
If it was, I wouldn't admit it. No, honestly, the firm that I've been in, I've never had any of those kind of issues. We've learned our lesson from Enron.
Aninta, do you feel like you have any conflict of interest?
No.
I think with accounting, we can't really discuss this issue with you guys. I think, for example, in the area of law, definitely
yeah.
you would have issues. For example, as an employee, you don't really get to choose the case you work on. And, the higher you go up in the firm, then definitely you don't really get much of a choice. So that ethics might come into that.
Going back to the point, I thought it was a really interesting point, so I'd like to go back to that, about Muslim women, particularly in the workforce. So do you feel almost like Muslim women sort of miss out in both ways? Because one, they can't form the networks that they may need to form to get ahead, and two, maybe they have these other responsibilities that are kind of forefront in their mind, which is, being a wife, if they are married or whatever it may be.
I don't know, like the culture in my workplace is so different. We don't have any Friday night drinks. We don't have any sort of that kind of, and we still manage to get along just fine. We work lunches and yum cha without drinks, still works out fine for us. So in that way, I don't feel that I miss out on any networking opportunities.
But say at Ernst & Young, for example, what would have been the case?
Oh, definitely, it would be hell. I would not stay there. Like 6 months there was too long for me. I couldn't do it.
That's very interesting. But then for like a young Muslim, for example, who's at university studying business, and how would they know which corporations, are the really difficult ones for them to go into because of those issues? I mean, is it just a case of trial and error?
It's a trial and error. I was lucky to have been able to go to these internships before I choose the place that I want to work at. But most people, they just, put their feet in and then, end up there for how long,
Yeah, well, you've only stayed in one place, Sabeeh, so I guess maybe.
I stayed in a place that I'm pretty happy where I'm at. And I've been there for a fair long time now. Developing Stockholm syndrome, and I think EY is pretty excellent in terms of respecting.
They are really accommodating. Yeah.
They and like I mentioned before about changing my work hours for Ramadan, coming in earlier, leaving earlier, providing a prayer room at work. I mean, it's just these little things that show that
you guys have a prayer room
at work. Yeah, and just they take that extra step to make sure that they're not discriminating against any particular person.
Yeah.
And they have been quite good.
Yeah, but still, I guess the bottom line is, like, for example, if you had a pressing issue for a client and it was Friday and it was getting close to Jummah time, I mean, their sort of tolerance levels can only extend so far, right?
I don't know. I never skip Jummah, and I always take like 2-hour lunches on Fridays. So, and I haven't had any problems yet. But you do actually touch on what's probably a difficult topic. I mean, we can talk as much as we like about Friday night drinks and social events, but let's be frank, the most difficult thing about being a Muslim in a workplace, the most difficult thing is your 5 daily prayers. And this is what, I think this is a problem that's endemic across all Muslims in the corporate world, is that hitting that dhuhr and asr, when you're sitting at your desk and your adhan alarm goes off, you're like, oh, I've got this to do, do I have 5 minutes to spare? And then you ask yourself, what do I really need to ask about 5 minutes to spare? And it's about remembering,
especially with daylight savings, like it's really close to each other.
Yeah, you only have a small window issue, but that again isn't the workplace. That isn't about the corporate world. It isn't about Western society. It's about being a Muslim and remembering Allah when you're meant to remember Allah. And did you have difficulties when you try to do your prayers and stuff?
Now or at EY?
Wherever.
Oh no, we have a prayer room as well. EY I found really accommodating with that, and so is this one. They actually asked me before I asked them. They were the one that came forward and said, do you need a prayer room? And I was like, yeah. And they said, yeah, we have one. So it was pretty good. It was pretty good. Big companies, like if you stay with big companies.
Even government we get.
Yes, government, yeah.
Don't.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because it's probably like a precedent. Somebody maybe 5-10 years ago said, well, I need to pray. And then now it's like they even preempt your question. They know that if you're Muslim, you're going to need somewhere to pray.
Well, speaking of precedent, as young professionals, both of you who have worked in the corporate world, just to end off the segment, what would your advice be to up-and-coming young Muslims who are entering the corporate world in relation to these issues? So, for example, you guys are lucky that the road was already paved for you. So with EY, the prayer room was there. With you, the prayer room was there. You know, with Jummah, those facilities. How about, for example, smaller mid-tier firms that wouldn't have those facilities? What would your advice be to young people who are just getting into it?
Just have swag, lots of it, and you'll be fine. To Muslims, to young Muslims, remember who you are, remember where you're coming from, remember your as Sister pointed out, just make it really clear that you're a Muslim and that's why you're not drinking. Don't be afraid to tell people that you're a Muslim. I didn't for the first 3-4 months. Every single Friday when I went out for my customary Diet Coke, not Diet Coke. I'm a man and I drink full sugared Coke. And they'll be like, there are only so many times you can tell them I'm the designated driver, and then it's just like, okay, I'm a Muslim, I don't drink.
So you came out of the closet, in effect.
Which closet are we talking about? Yeah, pretty much. So don't be afraid to tell people that you're a Muslim. People, they'll go out of their way to be respectful towards it.
Yeah, I think, know your priorities, and, so what if you jeopardize some things, but do you really want to, disappoint Allah in, not doing all that stuff that is obligatory. Yeah.
And just to chuck a final spanner in the work, what would you do if, for example, another Muslim colleague is fine to do everything on the face of the sun and they are visibly very Muslim and they like to tell everybody they're Muslim? So, for example, you'll say, sorry, I'm Muslim, I don't drink, and then the person says, sorry, I'm Muslim, but I drink too. So how would you balance that, especially to the Muslims that are, the non-Muslims that are getting those conflicting messages?
That's when that happens to me. I remember I was out and I said, they're asking me, do you drink? I'm like, no. They're like, why? I'm like, Muslim. She's like, so? I'm like, well, Muslim, we don't drink. She goes, what? I'm like, yeah. She goes, I have Muslim friends and they drink. I'm like, well, are they Muslim? I mean, it's kind of a harsh question to ask, but you can only explain to them, say, according to Islam, we don't drink. Muslims may or may not drink, but according to Islam, we don't drink. And that's pretty much the only answer you can really give without chucking too much mud.
Yeah, I agree. That's what you can do. And if they are around you, show them what being, Muslim is all about, because that happened as well. And after a while, she stopped drinking because she sees me not drinking. And then she started talking to me about the hijab. It's like, oh, it actually doesn't look bad on you. It looks really bad on my mom. So now she's thinking about it.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. Thank you so much for coming in, guys. We've gained a lot of insight into the cutthroat world of corporations. So thank you so much.
No problem.
No worries.
Oh, mountains of Mecca, what can you tell of the day that stones from the sky fell, destroying an army determined to break the house of Allah that Abraham built? Oh, mountains of Mecca, how was the dawn on the day that my prophet Muhammad was born? How did it feel knowing he was to be the last and most beloved of all, Rasul of Allah, Nabi of Allah.
Joining me in the studio is Brother Mehmet Ozalp. Brother Mehmet Ozalp is an author, academic and community activist. He is the author of 101 Questions You Have Asked About Islam, Islam in the Modern World. He has also co-authored Sustained Dialogue, Close Encounters of the Muslim-Christian Kind. And most recently, and the reason why he's actually in the studio today, is for the launch of his new book, Islam Between Tradition and Modernity, an Australian Perspective. Welcome to the show, brother.
Thank you.
So, Brother Mehmet, what's this book about, Islam Between Tradition and Modernity, an Australian Perspective? What does it address? What does it cover?
Well, the book has 18 chapters and it covers everything about Islam in a thorough but in a summary way. but also contemporary issues related to Muslims and Islam as well.
And you've got the tagline from an Australian perspective, so are we looking at like an Aussie version?
Well, it's Australian perspective because I am in Australia, and a lot of the my evaluation of these topics will be from an Australian perspective, but it's still general enough to apply elsewhere in the world, of course.
So how is the material that you've addressed in this book specific to an Australian context? Like, can you give us an example?
Yes, for example, in one of the chapters I talk about Muslims in a Western context, and that's where I deal with migration into Australia, stages of migration. I talk about 5 stages, and it's not complete, even though Muslims have been in Australia for 40 years or more. And the integration issues, I do touch on around the world, Europe especially. However,
it's a socio-political.
Most of the research work comes from Australia. Every country is unique in its own right. Even though when we talk about a Western world, we mean North America, Europe, Australia. There's a lot of similarities, but there's also nuances of differences as well.
I think this makes me think of Tariq Ramadan's book, To Be a European Muslim. So it's kind of similar. Like, I think the shared experience of those, as you said, in Europe, in America, in Australia, it's a Western experience of Islam. So I can see from the chapters in the book that you discuss things from, theological issues, so such as monotheism, prophethood, revelation, and things like that, to more, I don't know what the term would be, like, contemporary issues. Such as, terrorism, interfaith dialogue, jihad, women, things like that. So your take on these topics, is it mainly addressing a non-Muslim audience who seeks to understand Islam, or is it trying to, peel the layers back for a Muslim audience to take them back to the,
It's both. Yeah. I always think about the Muslim and non-Muslim audience when I'm writing, and especially in this book as well. But I feel that my contribution to these topics, obviously, we talk about Quran, what it means to define a Muslim, the Prophet, peace be upon him, and 5 pillars, all that. But my approach is different in that, for example, when we're talking about 5 pillars, I focus on the spiritual elements and what it gives to an individual and society, more rather than just being descriptive of what you do. Also, in terms of defining Islam, for example, Muslims make a lot of mistakes, and therefore non-Muslims, they say Muslim means someone who submits to the will of God. Although this is not incorrect, it lacks definition. It's very restrictive, the understanding of Islam, and it gives an impression that Muslims are like robots, fulfilling the will of God, which is expressed in a text. And because they don't believe this is God's word, they feel that Muslims are stuck in this, with this text, thinking
within
that
a paradigm they can't get out of.
Will of God.
Yep.
So, for example, in the book, I've got a section called Islam in 10 minutes. How do you explain Islam in 10 minutes? Because I've been in that situation for a lot of cases. And there I talk about different ways of defining Islam, and I use a more holistic understanding of what it means to be a Muslim. Also in the first chapter, I try to give a worldview of Islam, and I think that sort of lacks as well in literature. We don't see, like, what does Islam say about the universe, the earth, the life, human being. And what are the different ways of looking at them? How does the whole fit together into a purpose of life? A lot of the literature written in English doesn't cover these aspects. So even though the first 6 chapters are about Islam as a religion, I feel that I made a contribution there that readers would find interesting.
So I'm assuming that's the main reason behind you even publishing such a book, so to fill in the gaps where you thought the current literature does not address. So is that the motivation behind writing this book?
Exactly. I feel that I've made some contribution. Obviously, there are similarities to some writers around the world, but for instance, the chapter on terrorism I feel is quite unique, that
I mean, even the way you've addressed it, like the chapter is entitled "Can a Muslim be a terrorist?" rather than the usual terrorism in Islam or
Just
Islam and
cutting
terrorism.
straight to the chase there.
Yeah.
That's right, and that's the whole crux of it.
Yeah.
You know, yes, there are issues around terrorism, and some Muslims are engaged in terrorism, but can a Muslim be a terrorist?
Yeah, by
At the end of the
definition.
day?
Yeah.
And if some Muslims are doing acts of terrorism, why? What is the people want to know?
Yep.
And I feel that I've answered that well. All of these writings are backed up by research and other academics.
And I think it's interesting the topics covered, like from bioethics to globalization to, for example, you've even got a chapter on Turkey as a case study for the future, so where the Muslim world should head. Now, the main, so the target audience, is it a book you just pick up and kind of read on an afternoon, or is it more, for an academic essay as a backup? Like, what do you perceive it to be as an author?
Yeah. Once again, I try to address all everything, and the style of the book is such that it's very readable. If you read it, it'll just flow.
Yep.
I'm hoping I've got that feedback already from some people.
Yeah.
So for an average reader, whether you're studying Islam or not, you will find it very useful, readable, and enjoyable to read, and it will give you something, knowledge, in-depth knowledge into these issues. But still, it's simple enough for you to understand the arguments. But at the same time, the material is backed up by research, so it's not just what I think.
It's academic.
But obviously, I've got an input there, but I'm trying to piece together different arguments, information, events, and come to a conclusion. So in that sense, it's academic as well. Students from universities to other academics will find it useful.
Okay. And I see that you have a launch for the book this Saturday, the 28th of April. Could you explain what's going to be taking place at this book launch?
Yes, we thought that
they're going to launch the book.
ISRA, I'm the director of ISRA, and this is it really comes from the work that ISRA does in terms of our university Islamic studies courses and other training that I do, which motivated me to write this book. It will be used as a textbook in a number of courses. So the ISRA will do a launch of the book this Saturday.
7:30 to 9 p.m. at the Sabeeh Hotel in Parramatta, 350 Church Street, for those who are interested.
That's right. And as part of the launch, obviously, I'll make a speech about the title. The title is, I thought about it a lot, Islam Between Tradition and Modernity. Although it may sound boring, but I feel that this reflects the reality of the situation. Because whatever issue you look at, it seems that there is this tradition that comes culture or from history, rightly or wrongly.
And we're looking through the prism of modernity.
Yeah, there's the contemporary reality. And Islam seems to be caught in between. And that's been my approach in the chapters. I always, for example, if you talk about interfaith dialogue or democracy or secularism, I would look at what would Islam say about this in its text, and what's been the tradition up till now, what are the contemporary realities, and how can we navigate through that as Muslims?
So like almost a dichotomous, like, paradigm within the title itself, tradition and modernity, how to balance that, So
at the same time, Islam is the link for us.
For both,
because there is a gap between tradition and modernity.
So the speakers here, you've got Dr. Ibrahim Abu Muhammad, who's the actual Mufti of Australia, and you've also got Professor Tom Frame, who's the director of St. Mark's National Theological Centre in Canberra. Now, what's his relationship to this?
Tom is a colleague from Charles Sturt University, and they have a Christian Theological Institute. And there's a Barton Books, is a publisher through that institute, and also Charles Sturt University, and that's the publisher which is publishing the book. Tom has been, obviously, as the publisher, he read the book, he text, and he provided suggestions. I feel he made a contribution to how book turned out.
And that's very unique because from a Christian background.
Yeah. The ideas are from me, of course. But it's good to get someone else's view on these things. You know, it makes you think and perhaps modify the way you express issues.
Okay, so for those who want the details again, inshallah, it's called Islam Between Tradition and Modernity, an Australian Perspective. It will be Saturday the 28th of April 2012, 7:30 p.m. till 9 p.m. at the Sabeeh Hotel in Parramatta, which is 350 Church Street. Now, Brother Mehmet, any concluding remarks, why would you encourage people to attend this launch?
I really think that they should read the book. It will really benefit them. Not because I've written it. I feel I've put in all my ideas on how I see these issues for the last 10 years that I've been in this field. A lot of interaction between Muslims and non-Muslims. We are living in Australia, in a non-Muslim country. We need to understand issues and how we can deal with them. So it will be very educational. So anyway, if they cannot attend the book launch, they can purchase the books through ISRA or Light Bookstore in Auburn.
But there will be copies on the night, inshallah, for purchase.
That's right.
Yep.
That's
okay, inshallah. All right. Well, thank you so much once again, Brother Mehmet. Inshallah, we'll look forward to seeing you at the launch.
Thank you for having me.
Jazakallah.
The Y Factor.
So this is the Lovebird himself, and I'm here with Lord Rathborne, and we're here to break some massive Jibba news.
That's right. All you Jibban-obsessed people out there, there is a new Jibban powerhouse.
Do you mean other than yourself?
That's right. True Elegance Videography, run by Ibrahim Abdu, can fulfill all your Jibban needs.
So if you need to make sure everybody at your wedding knows how much you love and cherish your husband or wife, True Elegance is the way to go.
Filming, editing and beautifying videos specifically to be shown off at your wedding, True Elegance is key to your very own Jibban dedication.
Find him on Facebook by searching True Elegance and enjoy being showered in Jibban.
Do I think we'd like listeners to know that we're actually talking about true love and affection and not actual Jibban?
All right, listeners. So with that Jibban it brings us to the end of the episode for this week. But just before we let you guys go, we'll quickly go through the events for this week. So as Brother Mehmet just mentioned just then, inshallah, this Saturday, so that's the 28th of April from 7:30 till 9 p.m. at the Sabeeh Hotel in Parramatta, there will be the event Islam Between Tradition and Modernity, an Australian Perspective. The speakers will include Brother Mehmet Ozalp, Dr. Tom Frame, and Dr. Ibrahim Abu Muhammad, who is the Mufti of Australia. So if you're interested, that's 7:30 to 9 p.m. at the Sabeeh Hotel in Parramatta, which is 350 Church Street, Parramatta.
And an interesting event put on by UTSMS, that is a lecture on Tuesday, May the 1st from 1 p.m. until 3 p.m. And it is titled The Fiqh of Facebook and the Tafsir of Twitter. And the location is the Multi-Faith Room in the UTS Tower Building. So that's Tuesday, May the 1st, 1 p.m. until 3 p.m.
That's interesting. UTSMS, and this is a part of the weekly topical lectures. Okay, you've all heard it, so just repeating again in case you missed the details. The final destination, the 5 phases of the afterlife. Inshallah, this is coming from the team who held The Man Who Changed the World, as well as the 7 steps to successful prayer. So this is the final destination, the 5 phases of the afterlife. The presenters include Dr. Muhammad Abdullah from Brisbane, Sheikh Bilal Asad from Melbourne, Sheikh Shadu Suleiman from Sydney, Sheikh Abu Adnan from Sydney, and Sheikh Omar Al-Banna from Sydney. They also have Sheikh Nazih Yafi, who is a Quran reciter, Brother Nassar Zod, Zahir Nabulsi and Muhammad Khudur as Quran reciters. So that will be Sunday the 6th of May, 9 a.m. for a 9:15 start. It's and it closes at 1:30. Will be held at the Grand West Stella in Lidcombe. It will cost $20. There are tickets, and all the proceeds go to charity, as well as segregated seating. If you're interested, you can buy it online. The website is allthingsislam.com.au, and you can buy them from the various outlets at Auburn, Bankstown, Lakemba, and Liverpool. So that is the final destination, 5 steps, the 5 phases of the afterlife.
And coming up is an event put on by IDCA where they have an international guest, Yusha Evans. He's been out here before, and if you've seen him, you know he is one not to miss. And so on Friday, May the 11th, from 7 p.m. until 10 p.m. He will be giving a lecture as well as and the topic is a transaction with Allah, and this will be taking place at Masjid Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, 361 Chisholm Road, Auburn. And so the time again is 7 p.m, which is after Isha prayer, and there will be separate areas for brothers and sisters on the night. So that's Friday the 11th of May at 7 p.m.
All right, now our last event for this week, it's the Victorious one, which is another Al-Kawthar seminar, as they hold the regular seminars. This is about the seerah of the Medinan period. So the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, the Medinan period of his life. It will be held on Saturday the 12th of May at the University of Western Sydney. If you are interested in learning more about the seerah of the Prophet with specific reference to the Medinan period, visit Al-Kawthar, alkauthar.org. Instructor is Brother Muhammad Chepi. So inshallah that will be very interesting. So if you're interested, visit the Al-Kawthar website. All right, I think that brings us to the end of the episode, listeners. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thanks to Zainab for her superb poem, and we do expect one next time she's hosting again. That's what's keeping her going from week to week. If you want to veto her poems or her presence altogether, just let us know on the Facebook page. Other than that, thank you very much to our guests, and thanks listeners for tuning in. You're listening to The Y Factor on 87.6 FM.